In today's program, I interviewed Dr. Alan Keyes, and we talk about the Republican Party, and we also give you, the viewer, a book list. Books that he and I think that it might be to your advantage to read. Hope you enjoy this installment of The Voice of Resistance.
Those who forsake the law praise the wicked. Those who uphold the law resist them. Welcome to the Voice of Resistance. Here's your host, Randall Terry.
Welcome to the program, friend. It is I, your servant, Randall. I had the privilege recently of interviewing Dr. Alan Keyes for 90 minutes. Nice, slow-paced time, talking, laughing. And today is the third installment of that interview. If for any reason you did not see the first two and you would like to, you can go online and watch them at our website, thevoiceofresistance.com. Dr. Keyes, in my opinion, is one of the most brilliant and articulate men alive in America today. And you will see why I hold that opinion as you watch today's program.
It's all unconstitutional as well as ungodly.
Right. Godless.
How come these people don't make this argument, Randall? Why don't they make this argument?
Because they have the fear of man. The fear of man brings a snare. He asked me a question, and I'm going to answer.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you for asking, Dr. Keyes. I've been thinking about this. What I think, and this is in no particular hierarchy of how we got here, but what I think is that the leaders on the religious right love the praise of men. And they want to be in photos. They want photo ops with John Boehner. They want to be invited to meet with George W. Bush in the White House. And there are unspoken and spoken rules to that agreement that you will not embarrass us with talking with shrill religious terms, that you will not be unyielding, that you just want a place at the table. And there's a toxin in the religious right that wants to be accepted. Jesus said, woe to you when all men speak well of you. That's the way they treated the false prophets. Jesus said, blessed are you when they hate you, revile you, separate you from their company. You don't get invited to the parties. You don't get invited to the photo ops because they've separated you from their company. He said, blessed are you when you've done that.
Randall, why on earth don't you understand why I feel constantly blessed then?
Right. Well, he said leap for joy. We should stand up and do the little cha-cha because he said leap for joy. That's the way they treated the prophets who were before you. So I think that there's a money issue because to get the biggest fundraising gigs going, you have to have the names come to your event. So it becomes incestuous. If you want a picture with John Boehner, you present him an award. You have him come and speak at your gig. You get photographs with you and John Boehner. You send out the fundraising letter. You look legitimate. Oh, wow, that's a big shot. He was with John Boehner. And this incestuous, I need money to survive. All right, I'll make this little compromise here, that little compromise there, and I won't rain on the parade. I won't be the blank in the punch bowl. And, I think, and you tell me what you think, I think that the religious right has basically, with a few exceptions, sold out to the Republican Party. Not to God. They're not sold out to Christ. I think they've sold out to the Republican Party. What say you?
Well, I have to be careful when I say this, though.
As a man who ran for president as a Republican.
When I say the Republican Party, there are many, many people who wear the Republican label who would share, who would share our convictions.
Yep. It's Carl
I am not speaking of those people.
Yes.
But if you're speaking of the controlling forces in the Republican Party and those who are now manifested as the leadership of the Republican Party, then I think there's just no doubt that people who claim to be, I always use the term moral conservative. I never understood where this concept of social issues and all of that comes from. We're dealing with moral questions. Why we would want to run away from the fact that we're dealing with questions of good and bad. It's not just questions of human interaction. That's what the term social implies, that it's all about human interaction and therefore conventional and therefore subject to human whims. Now, we're talking about moral issues, which
Justice.
At the end of the day have, according to the Declaration, already been determined to a degree that's fundamental by God. So I call it moral issues. I'm a moral conservative. The people who pretend to be moral conservatives, right, have in fact sold out to that Republican leadership in exchange for money and power, for a seat at the table, as they're always saying it, without much regard for how the table.
I don't want a seat at the table. I want the table to be made into firewood.
Well, I just want to make sure that I don't mind a seat at the table so long as the table is still in the house of God. If the table's still not in the house of God where the United States is supposed to be, then I don't want to sit at the table.
Psalm 23, the Lord prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Let them look and gnash, let them gnash their teeth.
And by the way, America used to be kind of a house like that, where the table was set for people in the presence of their enemies. That's why so many folks came here for haven, because you could get a seat at a table that was filled with plenty in the presence of the enemies of human nature and human good and human justice and human fairness, who had driven them out of their own country so that they would seek haven here.
Yes. Where would you rather be a Muslim woman? In downtown Riyadh or in America?
That's right.
Where would you rather be a Chinese woman? In downtown Beijing or in America? You know, there are people all over the world aching to be here who don't share the premise of the Declaration of Independence, but they see its fruit and they want some of that fruit. So I'll come in.
Well, see, and our vocation, I think, as a people to a degree, is to accept the fact that people are going to be attracted by something.
That might have been what I said was so profound that the heavens said amen.
You have two choices. I mean, you can try to raise your children by design, or you will raise them by default. There are no perfect parents. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. If we have a plan, we've got a better chance of getting it right in the long run.
There is something deep within the heart of every human being that longs for parental acceptance and approval. When does a boy become a man?
Get a group of guys around and ask them that question.
I don't think there's a certain age. Some men stay boys their whole life.
I would say, 16, 18 years old.
Wow, that's a good question.
When they get bar mitzvah?
Well, I think when he has a child. So I just became at 56, 56 years old.
Without the power of the Holy Spirit changing us and giving us power over our sin, we can't hope to be the dads that our kids need us to be.
It might not be. It might just be thunder.
But people are so attracted by the premise of what we are that they will come to enjoy the fruits. But it is our vocation to make sure they understand the premise. Don't just eat the fruits, but understand the premise. To put it in other terms, Teddy Roosevelt actually said something like this
when
in
you're
a
done
speech
with
that
this
he
Teddy
gave.
Roosevelt line, you and I are going to go on like a Jeopardy. Dun, dun, dun. We're going to go on speed mode.
He made a statement about immigration. And he said we should never see immigrants as mere factors of economic production. And that we should welcome everybody, but on the basis that they have come to participate in the American way of life, to be Americans, and therefore will stand on the solid ground.
Chamber of Commerce must have missed that memo.
Not only Chamber of Commerce. Everybody has missed it, because in point of fact, and I'll get back to the simple and singular point that I think is of all importance. The bridge between the Bible and the Constitution, which ought always to be respected in their political activity by people who are motivated by moral concern because of their respect for God, that you could call the religious right or whatever, is the Declaration. The Declaration is that bridge. They should be fighting from that premise. They should be making sure that bridge is never torn away, and they should be making sure that bridge is never disregarded. Instead, you know what they've accepted? They've accepted people and are starting to adulate people like Rand Paul and his father Ron Paul, I'll name a couple of names here, and others, who want us to believe that the Constitution is the be-all and end-all. And yet at the same time, they're pushing for constitutional conventions to change the Constitution. If you don't know the principles on the basis of which the Constitution was raised up and structured, how can I trust you to rewrite any part of it? You won't get it right. You're like an architect who doesn't understand the basic principles of physics and engineering and other things, trying to design a bridge. I don't want you anywhere near it. The principles have to be reflected in everything you do to amend and repair the bridge, as it was reflected in everything that was done to build the bridge.
Do you remember,
and if you've rejected the principles, you're
The,
no
the,
good.
the late Howard Phillips, God rest his soul, another great man, he fought tooth and nail to keep a constitutional convention from happening. He said, if we allow a constitutional convention to happen, we will lose the Constitution. We will lose the country. We will never get it back. And I fear.
And I loved,
believe he
I
was
loved how
right.
we were good friends for a long time. But I did have, and I was just explaining it, I suppose, because I think if I were going to found a party right now, and maybe over the course of some of those years when I was still a Republican, I should have thought of this. I call it the Declaration Party. Because I think
Instead of
that
the U.S.
we are
Taxpayers Party?
not in a crisis. The Civil War was to some extent a crisis of the Constitution because people still held to the principles of the Declaration. And Lincoln, thank God, was prudent and wise enough to understand that they still held to the principles of the Declaration, and he articulated those principles for the issue of slavery in a way that has unparalleled. It has just stood the test of time in our history, and it was his leadership that kept me a Republican for longer than I should have been, because I did not want to leave the party of Lincoln. But when it became clear that I would have to leave Lincoln to stay in the party of Lincoln, I decided that was too much. I would call it a Declaration Party because the Declaration enunciates the principles that tie us to the goodwill of God, and that make it clear, by the way, that government doesn't exist as some kind of, I don't know, arrangement of mutual selfish interest among a bunch of gangsters. So that if you want to rob, lie,
big
cheat,
cigar.
steal, kill, defraud, intimidate, we're going to let you have your freedom to do all those wrongs within certain limits, so long as you let us get away with the wrongs we want to do. That's what they're trying to make our politics into, gangsta politics. And the leaders will be the leaders of the different mafiosi in the political sense. Now, do you know what our Constitution was meant to be? It's that phrase, government based on the consent of the governed. Have you asked yourself ever, governed by whom? And the phrase in the Declaration, that, deriving their rights, instituted among men, deriving their rights to governments from the consent of the government, the just powers from the consent of the government. What does the phrase consent of the government mean? And you say, well, it means those who are going to be governed by that government. No, can't be, because they're not governed by that government yet. Therefore, at the time they give their consent, they are not the governed. They are the governing, because they're putting together the Constitution that's going to rule over that government. So in the moment when they give their consent to establishing the government, they are the governors of the government. So what are they governed by?
The laws of God.
The laws of nature
laws
and
of
of
nature,
nature's
nature's
God. Do you know what our Constitution was meant to be? It's that phrase, government based on the consent of the governed. Have you asked yourself ever, governed by whom? And the phrase in the Declaration, that, deriving their rights, instituted among men, deriving their rights to governments from the consent of the government, the just powers from the consent of the government. What does the phrase consent of the government mean? And you say, well, it means those who are going to be governed by that government. No, can't be, because they're not governed by that government yet. Therefore, at the time they give their consent, they are not the governed. They are the governing, because they're putting together the Constitution that's going to rule over that government. So in the moment when they give their consent to establishing the government, they are the governors of the government. So what are they governed by?
The laws of God.
The laws of nature and of nature's God.
Yep.
So, but who are those governed by God's laws? They are the righteous. And I hope it scalds the ears of all the enemies
Wait,
of
did
true
you just
liberty.
say the righteous?
I did. I hope it scalds their ears.
I'm starting to feel
Everybody would
something.
say, oh, no, Alan, don't use that word righteous. They might think you're being religious and so forth and so on. Well, righteous simply means one who acts in accordance with right. Therefore, one who exercises right. And our whole constitution and way of life is based on respect for the exercise of God-endowed rights. So it has to do with those who are acting righteously, and it is based on the consent of those who are acting righteously. And I can prove it historically, because you look at every document the colonies were based on, the Mayflower Compact and the Declaration itself. Those documents are all, they state right at the beginning, go look at the words of the Mayflower Compact. They are people who make it clear, first of all,
In the name of
that
God.
they are a society formed by the fact that they have come together in the will of God to do his business. And when the founders read Locke, they found this exact formulation. Locke says at one point that we are all put in this world by our master, the creator, to go about his business. And that's the concept they articulated in the Declaration.
All right, I'm going to become now the time tyrant. Because the clock shows no mercy, and that producer back there keeps on holding up these signs saying the amount of time. So I'm going to try and do something that I don't know has ever been done with Dr. Alan Keyes, Ambassador Alan Keyes. Namely, just try and tie you. I'll be the nag and try and tie you to some semblance of fast answers, because I want to like skip through a bunch of stuff in seed form. So it'll almost be a race, all right?
Well, we'll see.
Do you all know the point of a nag? The history of the nag was when a racehorse is on a racetrack, sometimes they will run themselves to death. And so to get the racehorse to slow down, they would set a nag out in front of it, and the racehorse would finally slow down next to the nag. Top 5 books people should read, according to Dr. Alan Keyes. And then I'm going to give my top 5.
Oh, top 5 books people should read. You start with the Bible.
Of course, always the Bible first.
Always the Bible first, I think. And it has many books, so I'm finished. But never mind. I won't go there. From an American point of view, I'd say my second book I always recommend to people, and this is from an American point of view, is the Federalist Papers. Because the Federalist Papers is key to the Constitution.
I'm the nag. Federalist Papers, 1.
And so that would be the second book.
2.
Third book I think is critical to read with the right understanding. It might be Plato's Republic. These are books I recur to a lot for various reasons.
Tall cotton, all right.
The fourth book, and you don't give me any restriction here, right? I don't have to be simple books or anything.
No, clearly.
Because for dealing with a lot of the issues and isms of our day, I think it's essential that one have a familiarity with. You don't have to necessarily read it, but you have to be instructed a little bit in its consequences with a book that had very serious intellectual consequences, and that was Kant's Critique of Pure Reason.
Okay.
It has a high-flown title and everything, but it's really about a fairly simple thing, taking a look at the limits of our way of understanding things.
And
that's all it's about. And I think that that's a critically important book in my view. And the fifth one, always keep in mind that these things are, right off the top of my head at the moment.
You're going to come back to me and go, oh, shoot.
Right, of course I will.
Right.
But a fifth book I think is important. And here, I almost want to say that there are 2 books tied for this position, right? Because I've done a lot with books that I would say are essential to right thinking, yes, and to understanding how to defend right thinking, biblically based, but also with a sense of science and philosophic underpinnings. But then you also have to understand
I'm
the mind
failing as a nag. See,
yes.
give me the 2 titles.
You have to understand the mind of your adversary.
Yes.
I got to explain this, because otherwise this book is very
If you say one
wrong.
of mine that I'm about to say, I'm going to be bummed.
One book that I would say is worth reading in the complexity of our day is just browse through. Make it a constant thing you browse through, because it'll help you to recognize origins. Montaigne's Essays. And I think that's because his thinking and the things he talked about and the way he talked about them have serious and significant relationship to everything going wrong these days. The understandings that are wrong, a lot of them Montaigne was deceived with. And finally, and I don't recommend
Tied for
this book
5th. Go ahead.
to everybody, tied for 5th. I wouldn't recommend this book or any writings by this person, because I think, I will say at the beginning, people say, is the Antichrist come? I think that, as is said in the scripture, Antichrists, those who are part of the body of the Antichrist, have been amongst us from the beginning. One of the chief philosophers who I believe was definitely of the body of the Antichrist was Machiavelli.
See,
And
I
if
said
you-
don't take one of mine.
If you seriously want to think through
The Prince?
the snares, you start with the Prince. But of course, you won't understand the Prince if you don't read eventually the Discourses. But
The Discourses, one of my master's degree teachers said that the Discourses were actually more important, in his opinion.
well,
Yeah.
that's why I said, obviously, if you can't understand the Prince without reading the Discourses, and you read the Prince, then you'll want to understand the Prince, so you're going to have to read the Discourse. It's actually essential. And it's not the only
Ask me
thing.
my 5?
Yes, what are your 5?
I don't read.
Oh, okay, right.
You have to have picture books. Tough crowd. All right. First, obviously, the scriptures. What I have been telling leaders for 20 years, the second most important book that you could read if you want to be a leader is William Manchester's treatment of Churchill called The Last Lion Alone. It's a 3-volume set. The first one is The Last Lion, Visions of Glory. The second one is The Last Lion Alone. The third one just came out post-death, co-written, called The Last Lion, Defender of the Realm. But The Last
So
Lion...
do I get to be the nag now?
Sorry, go ahead. Yes, please be the nag. All right, so go on with it, Randall. All right, so The Last Lion Alone. And if you want to maybe grasp what you're saying about the Declaration and really solidify your thinking in the connection between civil governance and the scriptures, and that this is a theocentric government, or it was a theocentric government, Gary Amos defending the Declaration would be a good primer for that. Then, know thy enemy. If you really know the scriptures and you can really articulate theocentric governance, Old and New Testament applied to the purpose of government and the limits of government. If you get that, then I would read the Communist Manifesto. I would know the Communist Manifesto to see the insidious nature of our current Democratic and Republican leaders, that we have become, without firing a shot, we have become a Marxist experiment. I would recommend, again, To Know Your Enemy. I would recommend Ibn Ishaq's treatment of Muhammad, The Life of the Prophet Muhammad by Ibn Ishaq. He wrote that about 100 years after Muhammad's death. I believe that Islam is the single greatest threat on the face of the earth to the human race. And if you want to understand Islam, you have to understand Muhammad. And this is a very clear treatment of Muhammad's life that will disabuse anyone of the idea that Islam is an inherently peaceful religion. So, how many did I do?
No, fine.
I think that was 4. Did I do? I did. That was 5. So, all right.
See, and you got me on that, but now I'm thinking of this whole list of things that I would have to add to that.
The Prince is a critical book. I mean,
the other critical book that I didn't add because I wanted to do the last 2 in a more general kind of know thy enemy sense. But in terms of knowing America, not knowing it as it is now, but knowing it as it was meant to be in principle, I think Tocqueville got it right. And so if you read Democracy in America, he has a very clear vision of what was making it possible for the American experiment to work the way it was supposed to.
Okay, so to continue being the nag, any other books, by the way? Anything that you missed? Because I thought of a couple.
The only book that I would think of is, I think people ought to read Democracy in America, Tocqueville's book, to understand how and what was the thinking that made America work in the first place. Because I think he got it. He got a very good sense of it.
Another, the Melian Dialogue would be good, from Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian Wars, to see the mindset of it's Machiavelli applied. Might makes right. Anyway, I had all these books shooting through my head.
Well, if you start talking books,
we
could be here forever.
Let's do this for the rest of this time together. You can just interject a book at any moment. It has no context, no bearing, nothing.
Okay.
Just any book. Oh, and read that. So, there you have it. The books that you might want to read, the problem with the leadership of the Republican Party. And of course, it begs the question, which Dr. Keyes and I are both involved with Tea Party activities, but the question is, who's going to control the Republican Party? Will it be pro-life, Tea Party, defenders of marriage, or will it be the Karl Roves of this world? And right now, the battle is fully engaged. Goliath, that is the old guard, they haven't given up the fight, but if this country is going to be restored, I think that battle is going to have to be waged. If you want to read more, if you want to take advantage of all of the teaching tools that we have for free, go to our website. Don't just watch the voice of the resistance, become a part of the resistance.
you.